We're visiting with Mr. Gordon Yellowman Sr. today, and now I'd like to talk for a little bit, Gordon, about your role within the Cheyenne Nation. I know that you've worked for the nation, for the tribe, for a number of years, and I think I first met you in your capacity as the coordinator of the repatriation office for the Cheyenne Arapaho tribe. But if you could talk with us just a little bit, share some of your experiences as a tribal official and someone who's worked in that sector on the behalf of your Cheyenne Arapaho people.
Well, I started out working, doing repatriation work when I was around 1993. And it was kind of interesting because I was working for the tribes at that time as a operation and maintenance department, and the chairman at that time started to receive a lot of these inventories and summaries, letters identifying human remains, identifying objects of cultural patrimony, and he didn't understand what they were, so he starts saying, "I need you to address these letters. What is it?" There's some talking about sacred objects. Some are talking about human remains. And so that's when I began reading the law NAGPRA. And I started studying it, reading it, researching it, and I became real familiar with a lot of acronyms, and NAGPRA was one of them. And so I started to address those letters and started to acknowledge receipt of those letters from the museums, federal agencies, and institutions. And so I did my work for about a year, and I finally told the chairman, you know, we really got to meet this government-to-government relationship. We got to really start a formal process of that acknowledgement. So what I want from you is, I've been doing this work for a year. I want you to appoint me to be the first coordinator, NAGPRA representative for the Cheyenne Arapaho tribes. And he did. And so that became my appointment as being the first coordinator of what we called the repatriation work office, NAGPRA office. And so I started doing repatriation work. And my very first one was with the Smithsonian, the National Museum of the American Indian, in 1993. And so we actually repatriated some remains that were associated with the Sand Creek Massacre. And we returned those remains from the Smithsonian, the National Museum of Natural History, and we buried them in Concho, Oklahoma. So that was my very first successful repatriation. And I started writing grants, and I was successful in getting 2 grants for the tribes, repatriation grants, to develop a program. And one of my very first objectives in that grant was to develop a database of inventories and summaries that were related to NAGPRA work. And so I became very familiar with the law, and I was very honored to look at my history of who I am as an individual, as a Cheyenne, Natista. And so I looked at the development of how did this law come about. The first one was Tall Bull. Tall Bull was very instrumental in developing NAGPRA. First Cheyenne. Second one was Rick West, director of the National Museum of the American Indian. Cheyenne. The third one was Lawrence Hart, the first Cheyenne to be on the National NAGPRA Review Committee. That's the third one. The fourth one, myself, to become the traditional religious leader for the Smithsonian's Repatriation Review Committee. So I looked at 4 Cheyenne men being at the forefront of repatriation work. That's quite an honor. If you look at a tribe in that respect, their work dedicated to returning their people back to their rightful place is hard work, emotional work, But that's our role and duty and responsibility as a chief. And so dealing with not only the physical remains of individuals, our people is very hard, very sensitive, very spiritual. Not only do we return the remains physically back to their rightful place, we have to deal with their spirit. And sometimes that can be very heartfelt. When you see skulls with bullet holes in them, it brings back a lot of emotions, pain, suffering. But yet, it makes us stronger people because we learn from their atrocity. We learn from their suffering. Repatriation work is going to continue for many, many years. This 20 years that I've been doing repatriation work, it's tremendous, yes, but we haven't done much. Time, you have to be very patient. And the letter of the law does have time restrictions on it. But it's a thing with tribes, when they're ready to do it. They don't go by calendar. They go by seasonal. They go by the traditions, and they go by the spiritual movement. And the Spirit will tell you it's time to return them home. Whether it's their spirit, the individuals, or whether it's a spirit that's helping you return them home. That's the unforeseen in repatriation work. And you have to be real careful because it can be detrimental. It can be harmful for you if you don't know and understand what you're dealing with. And so my work, all of the elders I worked with for the past 20 years, they're gone now. All of the individuals that I worked with, colleagues in various museums, they're gone. And why am I still here? Because I feel my work isn't over yet. And I will continue to assist and help with repatriation work and the return of Native American human remains.
That's incredibly important work, and I just want to add that as a museum professional, I also agree that the Cheyenne people have provided an example of this process and have been of tremendous benefit to both museums and other Native nations as they work through this process of NAGPRA and repatriation. So
it's very important. You look at concepts, case study, is what you call it academically. Scientifically, DNA, carbon dating. You learn all of that technique, all of the academic scholarly language. And you apply that language into your traditional language. How am I going to make it work? How am I going to bridge those two things together? When you think about that type of language, in most academic institutions, the scientific always talks tangible. Cheyennes, they don't think that way. Intangible, the spiritual. And so the scientific part of it is, I can't see it, I can't touch it, I can't smell it, therefore it don't exist. We don't have to see it, touch it, smell it. We sense the spirit is there, always will be, and that's the intangible. And so when I talk about language and concepts, I have to tie my traditions into the processes of that law of repatriation. I'll give you an example here at the Sam Noble Oklahoma Museum of Natural History. When we began repatriation work there, it was at the old Stovall Museum.
Yeah.
And we looked at that collection, and I brought a group of elders to come consult. And they asked me, why do we have to wear these white gloves? And I said, that's the museum's requirement. That's their policy, a standard policy to protect the object and to protect you. I said, these white gloves are like our sacred white sage. It purifies our body and prevents harm from us, from the object harming us and us harming the object. And they said, oh, good.
Yeah.
You're right. So we began our work. We put the white gloves on. And I said, that represents the sage. Very simple. But I had to be very creative in how I did it.
Yeah.
And so being creative has certainly helped me get to the next step or next level in repatriation work.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.